Again, welcome. This is week 4. We're over halfway through week 4 of Journey to Oneness for dating and engaged couples. And so tonight we are going to continue in a way, we're going to continue what we've been working on by talking about self-protective vows. So this is the title sounds kind of maybe, I don't know, intimidating or confusing, but we're just going to continue on with talking about what's different in the marriage relationship that needs some attention maybe. And so I'm really glad to be here with you tonight. We were going to have a couple here with us tonight, but they were not able to. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get them for week 6 for finances. It's a great couple, Donald and Michelle. And so hopefully we'll hear from them by then. Oh, there's Madison. Yay. All right. So what I want to start out by saying is, did everybody see or was anyone able to watch the pre-class video that I did this weekend? Anybody? Yeah. So you got a pretty good foundation that way. You know, one of the things that I always say is that it's good to review this kind of thing anyway. I'm not going to go back over it tonight, of course. So what we're doing tonight, if you feel like you'd like more of a biblical, a scriptural dive into what it's about, or if just you want more definition, you feel like it'd be clearer, you can watch that video, and it's got, it actually goes through most of the first part of your participant's guide there. And so tonight, as we begin to think about these things called self-protective vows. So I've also thought about calling them self-promises, things we promise ourselves that we will never do or always do. And I'll just put a little highlighter on those 2 words right now. Those are fighting words in marriage. When someone says you always or you never, it's well, first of all, it's never true. Well, I suppose it could be in some instances, but it's almost never true. And it really puts like an underline that you don't need under it. We want to keep things in the present as much as possible. You know, none of us are saints. We all need to work on it. So, but when you think about it, you say, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say what's true for me now. That's the kind of thing that we want to talk about tonight. So we're going to lead up to the homework that you guys are going to do together, I hope. We'll start it in class tonight. But just remember that you can review that video or this one at any time if you think that there's something that is really you missed or that you've forgotten, because we all need to keep learning about this. It's usually going to be new for you. So the other word that I want to have you consider is autopilot. Okay, so you know what it's like when something goes on autopilot. It's going to do the same thing every time. You go right down those roads. They're well-worn paths. They're grooves. And in some of us, they might even be ruts where we feel it, we can see it, we feel it, we know it, and we do it anyway. And so tonight, as I'm talking about vows, you can actually even say to yourself, you know, oh, there's ways that I show up regularly that don't seem to fit what is actually happening. Okay, so inordinate reaction to something that happens in your relationship, that's going to be a really big sign that tells you if there's something that's a vow or a promise or an autopilot that you're on. And so the most important thing to realize is that for some of you, if you have made vows in your life, they might be working for you still. And I say still because it may not have been challenged yet, and it may never be. But what you have seems healthy. What you're doing feels healthy. It feels sustainable. It feels redemptive, like it's working in your relationship. We don't want to look for something that's not there. We only want to talk about the things that we think might be getting in the way or causing us to get tripped up a lot. And in my experience, there's usually that it's not in every area of life. It's in maybe one or two where you go around and around. I told folks for years that my husband and I, excuse me, I gotta let somebody in. My husband and I don't think we had an argument until for the first 2 years of our marriage. And when we started arguing, it was about parenting. When we had our son, and parenting was like night and day. Sometimes I couldn't even fathom the way he thought about children. I mean, I felt, like from in every way that children were born innocent and they were a clean slate and they responded to the way that they interacted with us, the things they experienced. He believed that children were born evil. And they had to have it worked out of them. You obviously can see we had different parenting experiences. And so it wasn't like he was harsh, although sometimes it seemed that way to me. He just thought our son was stubborn. And I never thought of him like that. I never thought that he was trying to get his own way or anything like that. So we were bumping heads right and left. It took us a lot to figure that out. And I would say the first 7 years of my son's life, which is a long time. But both of us were reacting to the strength of the other person's conviction. Rather than listening, we were wanting to be right. And I think that something that we've learned now is that neither of us had the whole story. Neither of us knew exactly what had to happen. But when we were resisting each other, it felt really hard to stay close to one another and to stay vulnerable, right? It's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is if you feel you can't be vulnerable, then it's going to strain your relationship. So one of the things is, what is it going to take to have a safe place to be vulnerable? And I'll talk about that more as we get into this tonight. So let's say that your ways of, or your modes of I'm sorry, what am I trying to think of? Your plans for happiness are getting in the way somehow. The way you've been living is now starting to get in the way. You may be sensing a need to change or grow your way of being in this world. So something's coming up, you're recognizing it. Maybe there have been interruptions or difficulties in your life that have shaken things up a bit. I think about the pandemic and how many people really were negatively affected by the being alone, or maybe their job got really intense if you were in healthcare. I mean, there's just so many scenarios, but anxiety, which is what we've been talking about these last couple of weeks, just went off the charts. And some people struggled to go back and to be different after the pandemic, but maybe yours was something else. Maybe you had some sort of trauma happen in your life. And so you feel that sense that I'm not at my best, or there are things I really want to grow in. Maybe it is this relationship that you're in that causes you to say, I need to address some things. And if that was all that came out of this class, I would be a happy camper. I mean, that just knowing that there are always going to be things that we need to work on. In the moment, I'll just be honest, in the moment, I never like to admit that. It hurts. I resist it. I hem and haw, I go around it. And then in the end, because I do talk to God about it, I do. Jesus and I have words. I come to that place where I say, this needs to change in me. It's not okay for me to ask my husband to overlook this over and over and over and over again. It may be understandable, okay, like the way that I'm responding may be understandable because of my experiences in life, but it doesn't mean that it's okay. And or that I don't need to communicate with him about it, about how to grow in that area. It also means that he's allowed to bring it up. I don't like that either. And I'm allowed to bring stuff up too. But believe me, when you're feeling like you have to defend yourself, those things don't get done. We stay in defense mode. So think about that as I'm going through a few things tonight. I'm going to give you lots of things to think about. And I really hope that you have that sense that that's what this is about. Okay, so think of this as taking responsibility in life, because that's what we're doing. I'm saying that I will take responsibility for myself. And hopefully my husband will too. But do I have control over that? Like, he's an individual, he's a person. I don't want him to do it under duress. I want him to take responsibility for himself because he sees and understands, as I do, that it's what we need to do to stay close in our marriage. We're at 30, almost 30 now, at 40, 50, whatever. So I'm learning about the ways that you could communicate your thoughts or feelings better. This is a really important one. Most all couples respond yes to the question, I become silent when my partner doesn't understand me. If you're asked, when you feel misunderstood, do you become silent or do you lash out? Almost everyone says they become silent. We go inward, we hide, we think, and I would say a lot of times what happens is we think the worst about the other person, or we believe, maybe, we start to believe things that aren't necessarily true. And so when you think about communicating your thoughts and feelings to one another, we're going to talk tonight about what it would look like to do that in a way that everyone feels good about. And so the other thing is addressing how anxiety stops you in moving forward in your life and relationships. So you're going to, if you're thinking about these catalysts in your life that bring up the anxiety, you're going to be able to say, is that something that is still a real threat in my life? When I was little, my dad left. That does not mean my husband's going to leave. Even if those feelings come up in me, I can take responsibility and begin to say, the way that I'm reacting to this is not doing us any good at all. I need to respond when I have that. And maybe I need to take some time, or maybe I just need to tell my husband, this is really triggering me and it's not you, but I need to take care of this. So communicating your thoughts and feelings and finding out or discovering how anxiety stops you when you want to move forward. And we're going to gain awareness and begin to grow. So that's kind of the thing that I think I want everyone to have in their toolkit, is awareness of what's going on there. And then the idea that I'm going to grow. I'm not going, repeat after me, like we did last week. I am never going to be perfect at this. Right. Okay, you guys tell each other that, because it's about growing. We always grow. Most of us don't ever arrive. There may be a time or a period in your, I know there will be times or periods in your relationship where it will just be so good. You'll feel like it's so great, a new honeymoon or honeymoon periods. And then there'll be times when you're challenged. And in order to keep growing, you will lean into those things in this way. So what I want you to think about is that rarely do self-improvement methods succeed unless we're ready to change. Okay. It's January. We just finished January. All of us know about those resolutions, but usually things have to become uncomfortable enough for us to change. And so that's what I'm thinking. I think, we need to go where the pressure is, or the maybe the motivation is. So if there's an area where you're really feeling a lot of pain, or you really want to do a lot of work, that's the one to go to. Don't try to tackle them all at the same time. So, I'm trying to think of an example. When my husband and I were arguing about parenting things, that was the thing that we wanted to lean into. That was the thing we went and talked to other couples about. That was the thing we asked for prayer for in our small group. That's where we put the energy in. We didn't have to work on other things at that time. We still communicated really good. Our sex life was fine. We were doing okay in finances. So, that's just what I think is really good to think of, is that we don't have to have the perfect marriage. All things are not always going to be great, but you get to lean in. So remember that if you want something to change in your relationship, but your partner doesn't, what you want to become is curious about how they're thinking, what they're seeing. They may just be fine with the way it is. And so communication is going to be really important. And what I think I'm trying to say without saying it is, we don't demand that our partner changes. We don't give ultimatums. Ultimatums are almost never successful. And if they are, it's somebody changing under duress. And anyway, so we want to really be able to communicate about that. So these concepts will build on the work you've already done. We've already started. So we've started talking about family of origin, your parents' marriage, or the marriages you saw or didn't see modeled for you, roles in marriage. I think we've talked about that. I'm blanking right now, but like they are no longer the man does the yard and the woman does the dishes, which, by the way, is like there's dishes every day. The yard doesn't need to be mowed that often, but so roles in marriage. What are you good at? Who does that thing the best? My husband and I think about when my son was probably about 12, we kind of switched so that he was working part-time and I was working full-time, and he was home, or he was actually working more than part-time, but my career at the church was demanding a lot more of my time. And so we switched that, and for us, it was not a problem at all. But it could have been, if I was still expected to do all of the things. Anyway, we don't need to go there. You guys are probably way past that. I find that's less and less an issue in marriages where there are roles that women have and roles that men have. And then past experiences. That's what we're going to lean into a little bit more tonight, but we don't want to minimize the effect that past experiences have had on us. And we want our partner to understand how it impacted us And they can't know, right? They can't really understand because no one's been through what we've been through, and we all experience things differently. So, but you want them to say, I see that this is really important to you, or this is really difficult. This is really painful. And some of you might have examples. If you think of one, I'd love to have you share tonight. That would be great. So all of these things can make their way into our marriage and then begin to pop up in times and we don't understand. This is what we get to do, is the work to say, oh, this is one of those things they were talking about in class, because those times will probably come. So we're going to look at some possible scenarios. Again, I want to give you ideas so that they might spark your thoughts or your memories. And so the one that we want to go to real quickly is closeness versus independence. We're going to talk about this a little bit more next week in conflict resolution. But I'm giving an example here. What if your family was very independent? Everybody kind of did things on their own and were really confident and didn't need a lot of closeness, but you really desired more connection. Maybe you were more emotional than the other folks in your family, and it may have caused you to feel like you didn't fit in, like you were different than the rest of the family. So a self-protective vow around something like that would be something must be wrong with me, or I'm not lovable. A person who is sensitive and tender in that way could think that and begin to live that out in their life. Create a self-protective vow, and then that's the meaning they make, and then they start living out of that direction. Or another example that I think is really common is if your family is intensely competitive or very high standards, like really successful in life. And whether or not you've followed in the footsteps, you feel as if, even though maybe something wasn't talked about, it was just everyone knew that there was a certain standard that had to be met. I hear folks say this about like college education or a profession. Maybe, like there was no question what you would do. And so you just did that. And so there's this idea that we always have to keep this standard. Well, maybe you marry someone who didn't have that experience in life, or did, but feels differently about it. And so you get to think about how you made your decisions in life based on that. I mean, the extreme would be the idea that you had to be a doctor or a lawyer, something like that. But you later in life, you became a doctor, but you don't want to. Like, you realize that's not what I want. And so that may be really difficult for you to speak up and say something about. But those things can happen. So we've covered independence and closeness, and then intensely competitive or high standards. So one other thing I want to say about this is that this can be in conflict resolution, which again, we're going to talk more about next week, but this can be where one of you really wants the conflict to be resolved, and the other one wants to take a break, wants to wait, doesn't, really feels like it's not going to go anywhere good. And so the competitive person will really want to solve things right away. And they need to be able to give time, and the person that wants the time needs to promise to come back. You're going to hear things like that. So again, looking for where you see yourselves in these. So here are some things that may have been a vow created around these kinds of things that we just mentioned. I must succeed or I will be rejected by my family. Again, your words may be different. I can't ever admit that I'm struggling or that I'm wrong. It's just, it's not acceptable. Asking for help shows weakness. I can't ever need help. I have to do it myself. It's up to me to make sure that there's peace in the home. So this would have been one of those roles. You were a peacemaker, you know, in your home. I'm the only one that can keep mom from flying off the handle. Anybody else here try to keep their mom from getting upset and mad? Yeah. Or their dad, getting dad to engage with us. Those two things are pretty stereotypical, and I don't really like that, but get mom or dad to engage with us. You know, like there was a, you know, they were married, but there was this disengagement that you felt. So when you felt like that was your role, that can become a way that you think about yourself in the world, and that you need to be that way in all relationships for them to be successful. But remember way back a couple of weeks ago, we talked about overfunctioning. Those things like making sure there's peace in the home, making sure someone doesn't fly off the handle or get upset, trying to get someone to laugh or engage. Those are the kinds of things that cause us to overfunction. And so when you think of these, what are some things that you can see, that could lead to vows? Does anyone want to add anything to my list? I always like to have different perspectives from my own. Anybody? Lanika, were you gonna unmute? No.
No, I'm trying to follow along. Are you on the paperwork yet?
Well, there's notes pages, I think. Let me pull it up.
Okay.
And let me see. You think I would know the answer to that question?
That's what I was looking at. I'm just trying to catch up.
Why am I not? There. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's see. No, I'm having trouble. I know I have it open, but I'm having trouble pulling it up on the, if anyone has the, there we go. That's not right. There we go. If you're looking at that, we want to go back to, well, really it's just the notes pages. So just notes you would take from this.
Okay.
There's nothing there to follow along. I'm kind of filling in. Let me come back to you. I'm filling in the things that I talked about on the pre-class video, so they may fit there. Is that okay? Does that help, Monica?
Yes, thank you.
We will be looking at the homework pretty soon, but we're still working on this. So,
well, Kelly, I can just share that I can't think of like an extra thing to add, but I definitely identify with some of them.
okay.
Like the overfunctioning thing you just said, like trying to make sure that people, like even now, like I feel like, oh, I should like say something, you know what I mean? So, so yeah.
Thank you,
I
Alyssa.
definitely identify with that. Yeah. Or like trying to make things help someone not fly off the handle or things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're good at it, it works for a long time. Can tell you that. Anybody else thinking of anything that they want to share? I mean, I hope things are coming up in your minds as examples from your lives. Okay.
I thought about was like, for me, it's kind of like if something's gone wrong or somebody doesn't have money for something or things like that, it's like, it's my job to fix it. It's my job to pay for it. It's my job to just like take care of it, to eliminate the stress. Like,
okay.
Things like that.
Eliminate the stress. See, that's an example of a role. It may not fit the things that we have in our book exactly, but that's something you see in your family. And you'll most likely do it in your new family together if you don't think about how you're going to do it different. So again, they might be working fine, no problem, but we just want to know. We want to know what they are. So also, what things may lead to a lack of vulnerability? So let's think about that. We're going to go a little in things that make you not feel comfortable to be vulnerable.
Not being perceived well, or feeling like if I'm vulnerable, this may be something that the person uses against me later. At least that's how I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Anika. That's, yeah, we don't want to admit something if we feel it's going to be used against us. And let's just let that settle in for a second. When you think of making a marriage covenant with someone, and it's, and you intend for it to be for life, how am I going to protect against that? Against using things that when my partner's been vulnerable, and then later on, let's say they do the same thing again, or they struggle with it again, then saying, well, you do something and they get upset, and then you bring that back up. We're not going to go into that. That's the super underbelly side of all of this. But just think about that. Wouldn't it be wonderful that you feel you could be vulnerable and that your spouse would never do that, at least not premeditatively? Sometimes we might fall into it. Again, we're human, right? We're all human. Anybody else before I move on? Vulnerability, what makes it scary? Have you had some really good examples of feeling vulnerable? When you were vulnerable with someone and it really was nice? No? No?
I think what makes what was the first question? It's like, what makes you not want to be vulnerable?
Yeah,
right?
and or what experience would you think would make it really feel good to be able to be vulnerable? What's it like?
Yeah. Stefan and I actually were talking about this like as a conversation from a different book at one point, I think. And one of the things that I mentioned was if the other person isn't engaged, like if it feels like they're not listening, or if they're not responsive at all, or they're not really like in the conversation, then that will make me not want to share.
Yeah.
Or if it feels like they don't deserve my vulnerability because they're not showing up in the same way I am.
Well, that's really an interesting way to think of it, that you giving your vulnerability is something valuable. Yeah. I shouldn't say interesting way. That's a really great way to say it. It is valuable. It's just one of the greatest things. I'll tell you guys a story real quick that I always tell, even though it's been like, it's an old story, probably 20 years old. I hate telling old stories, but I had a rough relationship with my dad. When I was in my early 20s, he got sober and went to through treatment and 12-step programs, and we began a relationship for the first time in my mid-20s. And so it was rocky, it had some wounds in it and that kind of thing. Anyway, at one point, he was babysitting for us with his grandson, and we were late getting home. And he was so angry. This was before cell phones and texting. There was nothing we couldn't have gotten a hold of him. But he was so angry with me when we got there, and he just stormed out of the house. Well, I crumbled. Like that was one of my things. My dad leaving. Remember, and so I really kind of fell apart, crumbled, and my husband, of course, was there. Max was asleep, and I was just I was telling him how it felt and what I was going through, and I was crying, which is something I do very easily. And he was sitting, I was sitting on the couch and he was sitting at my feet, and he was, this to your point, Lisa, he was nodding and he was there, he was listening to me. And all of a sudden I looked up at him and I said, after probably 10 minutes of going on, I said, do you know what I mean? I laugh all the time because he was so startled that I turned my attention to him. He was so startled, and he went, no, but you're doing really good. Keep going. And I mean, the poor guy, there's of course no way he could know what I was talking about. But he did so good. That's the kind of thing that I know I can count on from him. He's not going to lie to me. He hates, he just can't. I don't know if he hates it that much, but he's just not good at it. He can't lie, but he's always willing to listen. And so, so that's a really wonderful example of me seeing these vows, these things that were really still there, that I was still so vulnerable to my dad, and being able to talk about it with him and to start to grow in that area. It was really something. So thank you. Also, Alyssa, I saw your comment. You said, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it is. I think it's a good thing. All of this is good. So let's see. Even though Michelle and Donald couldn't be here with us tonight, I asked them if I could give some examples from their lives, from their marriage, and they both agreed. Of course, they love teaching this, and I love having them teach it. But for Michelle, now Donald and Michelle were married before, and then remarried when their kids were grown. But Michelle was in what she refers to as an abusive marriage. And, it might even be one of those kind of stereotypical things where she was not allowed to work. She was completely dependent on her husband, and they had 2 children, and it took her many years to get free from that. But what she did, when she finally did get out, was she said that she made the vow that she was never going to be financially dependent on anyone again. She was going to be independent. And so she worked, 2 and 3 jobs. She just was absolutely committed to it. And then she met Donald, and during their relationship, that came up quite a bit, where she was, kind of not willing to share things, or not share what she had, but share expenses. She was not going to be dependent on him in any way. And then after they got married, about a year after they got married, she had a pretty severe illness, and she couldn't work for probably, I think, almost a year. And although the illness was hard enough, that for her was very triggering, where she all of a sudden found herself relying on him. And in this instance, it was a good thing, right? It was a really good thing that they were together, and he wanted to care for her and love her. But she was having a really hard time with it. And so she realized that. And I actually had the privilege of marrying them. And so I did their wedding. And so they came to me and started talking about that. And it was really, really positive thing for their marriage. And then Donald always mentioned that he and his young wife had a very competitive family, and success was the most important thing in his family, had to be successful. And he felt wherever he was in the lineup that he was not ever listened to, that he was never heard. And so he said he stopped talking for a year, like in middle school, like he never talked. And I thought, whoa, that's a strong self-protective vow, because no one listens. So why even talk? And as he came out of that, it kind of followed him into his life of thinking that he wasn't listened to. And of course, then when they were in their marriage, with his first marriage, it showed up a lot, but in his second marriage, he had done the work. So he came into that marriage having realized that he had that, that's kind of what you would call a chip on your shoulder, or something that really hurt you earlier on in life that you were going to say is never going to happen again. And so, I like, again, just to have these examples for us to give a little bit of our imagination to. The other thing that I think is really interesting here, just something to think about, is you may actually think of people in your family and vows that they may have had. So, this isn't so you can go to them and say, oh, I figured out what's wrong with you. This is what you need to do. But I think that it can help us to be more understanding with our families. Because one of the things that I always say is this isn't about who was right or wrong. A lot of folks don't want to throw their parents under the bus because they were good parents and there was this thing. And so they're really reticent to say anything about it. But honestly, what we're doing is we're saying, I see why I made the decisions I did, and now I want to take responsibility for it. Sometimes there's healing we have to go back and do if there was hurt or abuse, but that's not what I'm mainly talking about tonight. I'm talking about internal decisions that you made. So the other thing is that if your parent was a certain way, you may, through this teaching, be able to say, I think I understand a little bit more why he or she or a sibling was like this. And it really does help us to be more compassionate and caring and understanding. It also can lead to reconciliation if that needs to happen, or even a new, deeper connection with one of your family members. So I just love to think about the possibilities that are here. So again, remember some guidelines. We're going to do this exercise now, and I'm going to go through some of the guidelines. And this is a teaching in its own right. I think I'm going to share my screen for this. I have a PowerPoint set up so that you can follow along and maybe take some notes. What I want to remind us of is that we want to remain curious. If I think I know what's going to happen, or what they're going to do, or what they meant, I want to stop myself and say, is that true? Am I sure that's true? Is it completely true? Do I need to say that right now? Maybe I should wait and listen. So curiosity is what we are going for. So give me a second. I'm going to find myself here and share. There we go. Okay. Well, do my best. Okay. How's that? You guys see guidelines for this exercise? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So when we're sharing with one another, which is what this exercise is about, being able to share with one another, we want to do our best not to judge. You may judge some in your head. You may be thinking of things in your head, and that's okay. Again, that's human. But you want to try not to communicate that, to stay neutral in the listening part. Judge, analyze, interject, fix, or comment on your partner's perception of what has happened to them. So again, you're going to be sharing something from maybe your childhood or from a previous relationship, from a friendship. The goal is to know, understand, or have more empathy or compassion for one another at the end. So I'll say it again and again, it's not, the object is not to fix, but to really help the person feel heard. Okay. And you may want to talk about it when you're done sharing, and that's okay. So this is where I use that phrase, put a pin in it. You know, like you notice something's coming up in you, you're aware that you want to think about that. And then you say, okay, but this is not the time. So this is self-control, you know, one of the fruits of the Spirit in the Bible, where we have self-control. We have, we can take our time. We don't have to be heard right away. And we want to resist imposing our views on the other person. So I'm not talking about in any area of life. I'm just saying when it comes to what they're sharing. I may have really strong feelings about something, but I'm going to remain curious and not start to try and say what's going on for me. One of the rules of listening is that you listen. That sounds so simple, but especially I think in our culture today, everyone feels, you know, wants to share what they think. But here we're talking about something a little bit more tender. And so instead, what you want to do when your partner is done sharing and it's your time to say something, try and find ways to ask more questions. Questions, if they're done without any tone in your voice or whatever, you know, intention, but questions should always be met with a good response because you're curious, you want to know. However, if someone's telling you about an old boyfriend or girlfriend, you want to resist that temptation to ask lots of questions there. It's, you know, most of the time, I mean, we probably could think of 10 or 12 times when it would be appropriate, but most of the time, that's not your curiosity about that ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend or spouse is not, this isn't the time to talk about that because you're listening to your beloved tell about what happened to them. So you can be curious about the details or events that have followed, but try and resist that. I just think it's, for the most part, it's just a good rule of life. So next we have here, while this may seem stiff at first, the exercise might seem stiff at first, what we want to do is create a safe place for each other to be ourselves and to be vulnerable, because we don't want to have to hide or perform in marriage. If I feel like I have to perform for my husband to love me, that's not vulnerable. That's not wholeness. It doesn't work. It's not good. If a man feels like he has to perform a certain way for his wife to express love or to be accepted, it doesn't work. It's not how we want it to be. And so we start here. You know, there are always other things that can be done and that you can address in different ways. Right now, we're talking about sharing with one another and really growing that vulnerability that will go on throughout the life of your marriage. So we're back to differentiation. And again, I'm really glad that I'm able to help you to see the importance of this, because doing this kind of an exercise is how we create differentiation in our relationships. Each of us needs to be able to share authentically. I need to be able to be me. My husband needs to be able to be him. He's not nearly as in touch with emotions as I am. He has them and he expresses, you know, certain emotions a lot, but he's not like I am. So for me to say that he had to be like me in order to be vulnerable or connected wouldn't work. I have to accept what he has to bring to the table wherever he is. And so it has to be safe. If, you know, when I have expectations, too many expectations of my husband, he'll shut down. And then I don't like that because that's leaving, right? And so it's not what I want. So why would I put that pressure there? So here we go. Since vows usually come from previous relationships, what was it like for you to realize that your vow would need to be rewritten for this relationship? Now that's a question for you to ponder, because just knowing that this is what happened and why we did what we did is not the point. It's not the end. It's to say, how do I want to live differently now? So I would call that rewriting the vow. You have a negative, a self-protective vow. You want to have a vow that brings freedom and life into your relationship, or into you, so that you can have that vulnerability in your relationship. So, think about that as where we're going, the rewriting of these vows. I don't have to live as if the person I love is going to leave if I mess up. That would have been mine. And so where were you resistant to this process? If you all are listening and you're just thinking, this is too much, this is over the top, what's that resistance about? Again, be curious. And then lastly, for this part, what did you learn about your future spouse? About how your future spouse might need to walk out this process differently than you do. So when my husband was sitting at my feet that night, he learned a lot about how I processed that kind of hurt. We hadn't had it in our marriage at that point, and very, very rarely have we, but he needed to know how that happened. So just thinking about, that you want to, as much as you can, learn what it's like for your partner to move through these steps. And that's a beautiful thing when that happens. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share for a second and see if anybody has any questions or comments or things to add. Anybody probably don't want to tell me if you feel lost, but it's okay if you are. Challenged? Okay. One of the things I do always mention is that sometimes these exercises can bring up things that are painful or that you want to talk about with someone else. And while I am not a counselor or a mental health professional, I do listen a lot to folks and help them to find direction and where they need to go. I consider a lot of what I do as a pastor to be triage. So that's always available at Vineyard Columbus for you. So, all right, I'll keep moving. And I am wondering if we might get done early tonight. That's not a bad thing. Yeah, so there we go. Share. So this is in your book. Anyone want to call out the page number? You'll see it in your manual.
55.
Okay, page 55. Great. I mentioned that this might seem kind of cumbersome, but it's great to try it. And it's broken down just in case there's any confusion. But most of you will be able to just go through this and not need these reminders. So what I want to draw your attention to, first of all, there's partner A and partner B. And notice that partner A is sharing and partner B is listening, right? And there's these 4 steps where partner B doesn't say anything, unless it's good job, keep going, like my husband. You're doing great. So let's go through partner A's process here real quick. So this is back to what we talked about this, or I talked about this in the pre-class video. When I was blank, I experienced. So I'm going to use my little memory that I had. The earliest memory I have of anything like this is when I was 6 and I'd broken my leg, had a cast from my hip to my toe, and the cast probably weighed more than I did. And the first night, my dad was in the twin bed next to me in my room, and I was, I think crying, complaining, whining because I couldn't curl up, I couldn't bend my leg, and I couldn't get to sleep. And I don't know, maybe I was in pain too. It was pretty bad compound fracture, but nonetheless, my dad turned around, anyway, he looked my way and he was so angry and he said, "Stop whining. I can't sleep." And I have the very clear memory in my little mind of turning my head to the wall and saying, I can't ask for anything. Like, he's going to be unhappy. And by the way, at that time he had already left. So that's what I experienced. I experienced my dad when I needed something being very harsh with me. And so I told myself that meant that I could not ask anything of him if I wanted to have him. I didn't have these words at 6, right? But if I wanted to be close to him, I wouldn't be able to ask for anything. And by the way, there were other things in my life at that point that already clearly communicated that. So this was a confirmation. And so step 3 was I made a vow to myself that in order to be safe or avoid conflict and to belong or get my needs met, I will always never, here's those 2 words again, this is what I will do. Yours may not be as distinct as mine. Your memory might not be as distinct, but it really isn't. It's not how true it was or how exact it was. What it is how you felt, the feeling that came from it. So step 4 is what I noticed many, many, many years later. When I behave the way my vow tells me to, that my needs are a burden, I can't ask for what I need. It affects others in this way. This is how others respond. Others think that I'm fine. Others think that I don't need anything, that I'm really strong, and others experience me as they think that again, I guess I already said those. So I don't want to be this way anymore. I want to be able to say that if I have needs, it's okay. And people can tell me if they can meet them or not, but I can share my needs. So this is not who I want to be. I want to be someone who is authentic and is a real person, not someone who's hiding my own struggles, but is always there for someone else. That's not a healthy way to live in relationships, or to think that I can help them in everything that they need and all they need is me. That would be another thing that I believe. So now it's time for partner B to respond and partner A to listen. And so partner B says, what I heard you say you experienced is, and this is this is called active listening, where you repeat back what you heard them say. You're not saying what you think about it. If you thought that they misunderstood something, maybe you don't say, maybe that person didn't mean that. That's not what this is for. So thank you for being open with me about how this impacts you or us. Again, these are formal words. You'll be able to do this in your own really comfortable way. And so here are some prayers that you might say. This is the way you might pray for one another. And the one is for the person who's going through this, help me to commit to behavior in the place of this vow that will help me grow to the person I want to be and to be more present in my relationship. So you've got some content there. And for the person who's listening, Lord, help me to be a safe place, space or place for my partner as he or she commits to different behavior. So again, this is going to probably bring up other conversations, but this is a way that you can begin to learn to do it. If you have not had conversations like this, or if you find yourself not knowing if you can, or if maybe you've talked about it, it hasn't gone quite right. This is just a template for you to follow. And I would say as homework. So the hard part about starting this in class is that you may or may not have thought of anything yet. You might not have anything to do. So I don't want to take a lot of time in class, but I think we're going to just take 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes for you to share, take turns sharing just the first step, if you have something. I would say if you've never shared it before, if the person has no idea that it has happened, maybe, say, I'd like to talk about this afterward, because it's going to take a little longer. Maybe, I don't know. So how about we do this now, and then I will go on to the next homework exercise after we do that. Okay, so I am going to leave this up on the screen while you're doing this for 5 minutes, and I will set my timer and be back with you. All righty. Well, anybody have any questions, comments, feedback for me? That does bring up the idea that that feedback is really important for us at Vineyard in this class. Especially, we'll be doing a survey at the end, but your feedback is really valuable to us, especially online. What could, even if you have ideas on what could make it more interactive, or maybe topics that we didn't cover that you'd like to, I'm always up for that. So, and especially right now, because like tonight I could go over some things, or because we're going to have extra time, but I want to move on to.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes, please.
So I've been thinking about what you were talking about earlier with the vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if there's a proper, it's easy to be like, it's not hard to be present for somebody who's being vulnerable with you, but sometimes it's hard to figure out how to respond without sounding kind of like, like how do you respond sincerely? Like even when you want to, it can be like, oh, that sucks, or, it can be too much to respond with indignation, because then it becomes about your response to what happened, or you see what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of, how do you show that you're, responsive without actually kind of just being like too bland or too hot or too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Alyssa.
I said, or taking over, like just to add in an example of what he was saying.
Yeah. I think that's a really great question. And you're going to, I think trial and error is my answer. Personalities are different. So I would say as a rule, indignation would be a common, or being really hurt. So I don't think, I'm sorry, not hurt, being sad, very sad for them that happened. So I would say that kind of body language or facial expression could be communicated, but I would say indignation needs to be tempered anyway. If you do have that, it needs to be tempered so that you don't interrupt what's going on for the person. A lot of people will feel like they have to. We've heard about this with racial tensions. People feel like they have to make someone feel better about what's happened to them. That's the kind of thing. It's the same in this. If that I don't want to have to swoop in and help my husband not be mad at what happened to me, or vice versa. Get that? So I think that's a really good point, Stefan. But also you mentioned just not knowing what the right thing to do is. And so, you might have to make some mistakes and apologize, or, you know, maybe even stop the process and say, you know, I really want to do my best here, but I wouldn't say stop the process, but my husband could have said to me, you know, he could have just said, you know, I'm sorry, I just don't know what you want me to do here. Instead, he kind of did say that, but my response was to love him even more, you know, like, because he was trying. But making mistakes sometimes, and that happens. And, you know, boy, you know, that's hard to do. It's hard to come back from that. But you even bringing that up, Stefan, is, you know, what I say, think about how great that is, that you would be able to try when you don't know if you're going to do the right thing. I don't think that we ever want to try and pretend, but that'll take some conversation. And so, in other words, I have never seen my husband cry about the way his mom treated him. But boy, you guys, I mean, she was quite a piece of work. I mean, like what he went through, it makes me angry. That, you know, so he was sad, you know, he was kind of sad for me, but it makes me angry. And so when I would get angry about it, he would then start defending her. So it just completely made no sense for me to listen and ask questions. And then, you know, like he would say, I don't remember. I honestly have no memory of what happened. And then I would think, you know, okay, well, that kind of stops it, but that's his experience of it. So do you feel like I answered your question, Stefan? I'm watching your face. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts from y'all? Good input. Okay. All right. Well, page 56 on the participants guide. I don't know if we should have gone over this one first or the other one, but this is one that you probably have there. Oh, yeah. Let me bring mine up. You're all back. There we go. So, sensitive to criticism. So you're taking an inventory, and the inventory says for you to answer, I am sensitive to criticism. Agree, disagree, or wait, maybe this was yes or no. Okay, agree or disagree. So we're saying in general, or mostly I'm sensitive, mostly I'm not sensitive. One of the reasons this is in here is because it can lead you to understanding what some of your self-protective vows may have been. Why am I sensitive to criticism? Nobody likes it, right? Like it's never really fun, but this is a starter. This helps you to start about this. If you say you're sensitive to criticism, how does your being sensitive to criticism negatively affect your relationship? So you get to say that what you see when you are sensitive to criticism. And I left out the qualifiers like very sensitive, oversensitive, too sensitive, because we want to keep it kind of neutral there and just say what it feels like to you. And if you said no, how does not being sensitive to criticism affect your relationship positively? So if you say, no, I'm not, I'm able to listen and respond rather than react to criticism. And that makes it easier for us to make progress, you know, or to be closer in our relationship, something like that. So it's a yes or no. The next one is your partner. You're answering for your partner. Is your partner sensitive to criticism? Yes or no? And you see, if you do this separately, you have the ability to come back together, or if you took our inventory, we would let you know that you disagreed. So let's say I say, no, I'm not sensitive to criticism. And my husband says I am. Well, that's going to feel like criticism, isn't it? I'm not going to like that. But here's the thing. I can ask him why does he think that? Because just the fact that I don't see it doesn't mean he doesn't experience it. So if I react to that with defensiveness, then we're done. The conversation's over. We're not going to go anywhere good. If I say, tell me what you're thinking about when you said yes, because it may be one thing, you guys, oh, like, yeah, whenever, I don't know, I can't even think of an example right now, but whenever that happens, you always, get really defensive. And, and then I could say, I might say, oh, okay, so you're mostly that you're talking about. And my husband, I know him, he would go, yeah. So he answered the question definitively, yes, when he was talking about one area of our lives together, which again, that's still information. I can grow, right? I can say, okay, and this is getting into next week a little bit, but what would you like to be different about this? How would you like me to handle that differently? And of course, in this case, sensitive to criticism, there would be that it would be really easy to say, well, wait before you react. Listen to what I have to say and consider it without reacting. And again, this is if you try and do that, it's going to bring up the resistance that you have that may be connected to things from early life formation experiences. Okay. This is a really simple one, but I do think it's a great starting topic, because it can tell you where you get stuck in your conflict resolution, which we're going to talk about a little bit more next week. So, any questions on this? Pretty simple. Okay. You get to do it. You get to do this stuff together. And I was going to say too, one of the fun things is in coaching, you can talk about this with your coaches. If you do the coaching program, you can talk about it with your coaches, and they can give you, remember, or maybe I didn't say this to you all, but this is how I always describe it. When you have a coach in sports, which I know nothing about because I've never been in sports, but they give you feedback when you're doing really good, they tell you that's great. Or maybe you need to change something. You need to, like, I don't know, pull up on the bat or put your feet further apart, or, something like that. And that helps you to do better in that sport. And it's the same way with our relationships coaching. You get to say, they get to see you talking about it. You get to ask them what they think could be done differently, or anyway, it's just a really great way to do that. But it's not only talking through problems, it's also discussing, as we said in the covenant teaching, discussing how you want your lives to be together, what you want your relationship to look like. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Again, this couple is impartial. They don't know either of you individually. They only know you as a couple, and so that really helps. So one more personal application. I'm not going to go over it, but on page 57, it's a little bit more in-depth. If you're struggling thinking of what a vow might be for you, if you don't have any memories or you can't think of anything, this is something to do to really be reflective, and also to pray and ask God to show you. And I would say that if after all of this, you don't see, or you're not aware, one of the things that has helped people is asking their parents what they were like when they were little. What stood out the most about me when I was little? What do you remember about me? And that you can actually begin to say, oh, wonder why I was like that. Or also, you can, let's say that you do that sensitive to criticism thing, and your partner says you're really sensitive to criticism. You can ask your parents or your partner to work through that with you. What am I believing about being criticized that's not helping me, not helping us right now? What's the meaning I made when someone isn't approving of what I did? And is it still true? You know, if I want my husband to do a project and get it done within a certain time, is that so bad? I don't think so. But it depends on how he's feeling and what he needs, what his needs are. I have to take those things into consideration. And so he might not think that's sensitive to criticism, but I experience it that way. And so I can say to him, you know, is there a way we can talk about this without you feeling attacked? Because I just really want us to communicate about how this is going to get done. So there's some good examples for you. Back and forth. All right, everyone. You know, one other thing that I should probably do, and I'll leave some more time at the end to, again, if you want to stay on and ask questions, there's plenty of time for that. But if you go to page 59, actually go all the way to 61, we have something called identifying and sharing non-negotiables. This is an extra that we put in here for you. I would say this would be really appropriate for dating couples that are still in a dating process, not, you know, maybe you're talking about marriage, but you're not engaged, you're not planning a wedding. These things will most likely have come out if you're that far in, that you're engaged. So the only thing to do there is maybe just to read it or scan it and think about what we want to make sure we do is if we're talking about something we call non-negotiables. So example of that might be, I will not marry someone who is not a Christian. It's, you know, it's non-negotiable for me. I want to marry someone who shares my faith. Now, that's not a non-negotiable for everybody. So I'm not saying that as a universal value. I'm saying that's an example of one. And so there would be reasons for that. And what you want to be able to communicate are your values and why that's important to you. So the focus is on this is what is important to me, not what's wrong with the other person. You may have to say, you know, we don't have a shared spiritual life. I can't imagine living the rest of my life that way. Or it might even be something like we mentioned earlier, like alcohol. You know, the place alcohol has in your life. Finances, a big one is credit, you know, like whether you have credit or not, or debt, I guess I should say. So things like that can be really strong values to one person and not to the other, but you can work through it by talking about the values and then thinking about what kind of boundaries you might have. And then making commitments to one another to say, this is how we will do this in our marriage. But again, this is an extra. We don't spend any time on it in here because it really is something that usually happens early on in dating. People don't usually get to engagement and not realize this is an issue in their lives. So, all right. I think that I am done. And so how about if I just take some time, again, I just asked if there were any questions just a minute ago. So this is for the end of the class. Anybody have anything? And if you don't want to do it now, you can stay on after. You can hang out a little bit. If you want to know more about the coaching, I can talk to you about that, but you also can email. And next week, the Lovises will be back with us. Remember Cindy and Doug from week 1, and we're going to talk about conflict resolution styles. So it's going to be fun. Okay, everyone, let me pray over this, and then we're going to look, we're done a half an hour early tonight. It's really my gift to you. So, all right, let's pray. Lord, Lord, you know each of us individually. Lord, you know where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And I pray, Lord, that you would help us to see ourselves on this journey, that we would be able to come to it, to come to you fresh and longing to connect with you in this way. Lord, I am sure that there are folks who've never really thought about inviting you into these areas of their lives. And so for that, I just pray grace and courage, Lord, that we would be able to tell you what things have been like for us, be thankful to you for what we now have, and trust you, Lord, for all of the good things that are ahead, all of the ways we can do life together in a joyful and rewarding way. We thank you that marriage has such good qualities and potential in it, Lord. And Lord, I just pray that you would help each person to enter into this if it's something that is the right time for them right now. Jesus. Amen. Amen. All right, everyone. Thanks again for coming. Have a good week.